Welcome back to the Whole Podcast, KC, from the Whole Person here in jubilant Kansas City, where everybody is still buzzing from a football season well played. Kirby, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well. I was just telling producer Andrew about my stinky cat, just talking to guest Brandy about her hairless cats, and I don't know how they smell, but they gotta be a little better than mine. So, without putting too much of a timestamp on this, Kansas City is celebrating a Super Bowl victory. We're being thrust into national attention. You can't listen to anything without hearing people talk about Kansas City, which is, not the typical.
And also Taylor Swift.
And Taylor Swift, who is.
They go hand in hand now.
Yeah, Taylor Swift, who is officially born and raised in Kansas City from now. We're retrofitting the story. We have a very special guest today, Kirby, our first ever on the Whole Podcast, KC.
We're very excited to have Brandy Cooper here with us today.
Brandy Cooper is Director of Consumer Directed Services here at The Whole Person. We'll dive into what that means here in a second. But before we start diving into the professional stuff, listener, I'd like to tell you that Brandy's a very fun person to be around, and that I would like you to close your eyes and imagine walking into Brandy's office. It's on the second floor. There's 6 or 7 images of Marilyn Monroe. Everything that has eyes on it has googly eyes on it. There's ceramic cats, which I assume are modeled after the hairless variety. It's a fun place. It's a fun lady. Welcome, everybody, Brandy Cooper.
Thank you.
We'll hold
All
for
right,
the
Brandy.
applause at home.
So how did you get started with your career in CDS?
So I actually started about 14 years ago, not quite 14 years ago, in a very, 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 very small town. One of the 22 independent living centers in the state of Missouri, kind of near the Iowa border. I worked there for about 6 or 7 years as the program director, and over one of the programs I was over was CDS. And then I left there to move to the city and worked one or two different jobs, and then this position opened up, and I'm here. I've been here for about 2 years, a little over 2 years.
Wonderful. So I guess before we get too much into this interview, maybe we should explain exactly what CDS stands for and what it means here at The Whole Person.
CDS stands for Consumer Directed Services. It is very much like the traditional in-home services that people with disabilities get for just to have additional help at home. Only with the Consumer Directed Services program, a person with a disability is able to hire someone that they know personally, a friend, a family member, anyone, as long as it's not a legal spouse and they're 18 or older. And that's one of the biggest benefits, in my opinion, of CDS is that they then are more comfortable,
Right.
in my opinion,
Right.
with someone doing personal care and being in their home and around their personal belongings, stuff like that.
And someone who knows them well, and then also
Yes.
what their disabilities are, and more familiar with how to cater to that if needed.
Big increase in comfort, big reduction in risk, I should
Exactly.
say. Brandy, quickly, can you outline some differences between working at a center for independent living in an urban core versus in a rural area?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I actually grew up in a very, very small town just east of Jefferson City, so that's all I've known until 5 years ago. So I went straight from there to that small town that I was living in previously, where I worked at the Independent Living Center. And the biggest, I would say, hurdle for our consumers at that Independent Living Center was living in rural areas. Didn't have access to the things that we have access to and that are so convenient here in the city. Yeah.
Maybe we touched on last week. Kirby, you're from a real small town, correct?
I am, yes,
And
that's correct.
we were talking off air about some of the accessibility to different resources for people with disabilities being greater here in the city. And I guess that's a function just of population density to a large degree. So welcome to the city. I guess I'm 5 years late, but we're glad to have you. Can you tell us how the whole person, specifically as a center for independent living, compares with other nonprofits and companies that work in consumer directed services?
Um, well, the other non-for-profits in CDS in the state of Missouri are independent living centers. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 22 of them. Um, I'm not aware of any other nonprofits who also do CDS services. There may be. I don't know of them. Um, all of our other providers in the counties that we cover anyway are, as far as I know, all for profit.
Hmm. What advantages do you think having a not for profit or a nonprofit supplying these services offers over a for profit industry?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is the fact that we take our revenue that comes in, obviously, through the state or through because it's a Medicaid funded program, and we put that back out into the community or our consumers. We do home modifications to help people live more independently, have accessible housing, that kind of stuff. We have all of the programs that we have, adaptive sports, the other programs that we have here at the Whole Person. Those funds then are able to help those other programs, whereas for profits usually, from what I've seen, for profits have CDS and or in-home services, and I don't know what goes with that. To that, I don't know where the money goes at
Somebody
that
gets a
point.
boat.
Yeah.
uh,
So, if somebody wants to get started with CDS services,
Mhm.
what does that generally look like? Like, what's that journey look like for that individual?
I'll touch base on like what you need to qualify for the services. So one is you have to be Missouri Medicaid eligible on the Missouri side. We'll talk about HCBS on the Kansas side in a little bit, I'm sure. But on the Missouri side, you have to qualify for Medicaid. And you have to have active Medicaid. You have to have a physical disability for this program. It doesn't mean that can be your only disability. You can have multiple disabilities, but a physical one that can prevent you from, you know, doing activities of daily living, or as they call them, ADLs.
Mhm.
Um, that you have to be 18 or older, and then the biggest one is you have to be able to direct your own care. So you have to be in your right mind to make decisions.
okay, so I'm gonna briefly, for you, listener, and also for Brandy's convenience, as we put her on the spot to answer a question, outline what the five, or not even outline, just list what the five core services here at the Whole Person are. They are independent living skills training, which includes employment services, the department in which I work. Loyal listeners may recall. Individual and system advocacy. So that is fighting for people's voices to be heard, and also to fighting for policy change to benefit people with disability. Information and referral. That's hooking people up with information that's available. People with disabilities primarily. Peer support. That is where we have community support for people with disabilities from people with disabilities. And the last one is, of course, transition services, which is helping. It's twofold. It's kind of helping people who are in school transition to life after school, and also helping people transition from inside an institution, say nursing home, back to independent living. So, with those five in mind, Brandy, how does the consumer directed services relate to the core services of the Whole Person?
I'll actually really quick touch base. I mentioned earlier when we were just talking privately that I remember when there were just 4 course services. Um, I know I just aged myself, but about 10 years ago, or maybe even actually a little bit more, I know it came on in the 5th one anyway, is the transitions that used to not be a core service. So I was glad they added that one because I'm sure you guys will meet with the um, the Show Me Homes program. Great program. I actually worked with it at that other independent living center I worked at. But to answer your question, as far as the core services, it kind of all just comes together um, with peer support, with the advocacy. All of my case managers in CDS advocate for their consumers. Actually, had one last week who was advocating for a consumer who wasn't able to. They had an issue with the utilities. They were able to advocate for them and get that situation taken care of. Transitions, that one doesn't really come into play with CDS, but the other 4 do.
What's a day in the life of a CDS caseworker?
Um,
For context, the people who in this organization report to Brandy.
so they never know what's going to happen each day, to be honest with you. But a typical day, an ideal day, I should say, would be our consumers are required to have a monthly contact with their case managers, minimum of a monthly contact. So the case managers will start calling their caseload, just to make sure everything's good with them, make sure they haven't been hospitalized. If they have been hospitalized, do they have the supports they need when they come home? Um, Also, since they have a caregiver, as we call them, a PCA, a personal care attendant, making sure that they get paid for the services that they're doing. And part of their job, along with our CDS payroll team, is to make sure that, just as if you guys go to work, you punch in and punch out, that's what they have to do as well. And making sure that that's all accurate so that, they get paid for the services that they provide.
Earlier, you mentioned the services in Kansas. How are those different from Missouri to Kansas?
They're hugely different, but then the same, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So over on the Missouri side is also it's through the HCBS, or Home and Community Based Services Program. We just call it CDS, Consumer Directed Services. On the Kansas side, they just call it HCBS. So on the Kansas side, it works somewhat the same, meaning the consumer themselves don't really have a whole lot of difference, but we as the provider do. Um, we work with the MCOs, the managed care plans, such as Aetna, United Healthcare, Sunflower, through the Can Care program. Um, and then they have care coordinators, which are essentially like our case managers, who will work with the consumer to select a provider. And then us as the whole person, we more or less just do the financial part of it. We do the payroll and stuff like that.
Gotcha.
So there's no case management on the Kansas side for us.
You may be picking up on this, but straddling the state line between Missouri and Kansas, it doubles the number of acronyms we all need to know, because whatever the service is, Missouri will have one way to file the paperwork and a number of acronyms that you need to know for Missouri. And then Kansas has a different type of paperwork and a different dozen acronyms to memorize for it. And you're navigating them beautifully, Brandy.
Thank you. The plus thing, though, is our systems that we use, our databases, are the same on both sides. So that's
good.
That's a plus.
Everything internal, for the most part, will be uniform if you're a Missouri or a Kansas resident. So is for a Missouri resident, how would they go about entering in to consumership? And we call basically any client we have, anyone whom we serve, as a consumer. So you'll hear us throw around consumer a lot. A consumer is just someone who receives any service from TWP. Yeah.
So usually the first step, like I mentioned, they have to qualify for services. Now, whenever I say qualify, we don't make that determination. So if someone calls in and says, hey, I have a physical disability, I have Medicaid, I meet all of those things I mentioned earlier. Our intake team will then take their information, and then they will forward it on to the state, the Department of Health and Senior Services, DHSS, another acronym.
There will be a quiz after.
They will then determine if that person is eligible for services. And how they do that is they go to the consumer's home, they assess their living situation as well as their disability, and they'll do an assessment on them. And that assessment will determine, like, do they need bathing, personal care? Do they need homemaker chores? Do they need help with transportation? When I say transportation, not to medical appointments, transportation for like shopping and errands type stuff. Once that is determined, then they will send what we call a plan of care, which is exactly that, a list of the services that they can get assistance with. Our intake team will also process the application for the caregiver, the PCA as we call it. Once all that stuff is in and together and all processed, and to be honest with you, it really depends on the person and how quickly they get it back to us. Then it's handed over to the case manager, and that case manager takes it and does a training with them, goes through all the paperwork with them, the do's and the don'ts, signs off on it. They do a demonstration on how the caregiver clocks in and out, and then they're good to go.
And is it any different for a Kansas resident? Apart, of
It
course, from
is.
the different acronyms. Are there any functional difference for our listeners who might be curious?
There is a difference, yes, because on the Kansas side, remember, we don't have case managers over there. So they don't do any of those. I'm so sorry. They don't do any
the
of those.
president is calling.
They don't do any of those type of thing. Now they do an intake for them. So once, like I mentioned earlier, the care coordinator on the Kansas side says, the consumer says, hey, I want the whole person as my provider for the financial part of it, or the FMS, I think is what they call it. Then we will set them up in our system and do that intake process, but it's a lot quicker on that side because they don't have the whole assessment and everything that's done by the MCO.
And just to switch it up a bit here, could you just tell us a personal story of something with maybe a consumer that has happened here at TWP? Obviously, leaving names and specifics out.
Right.
But.
I actually just had one on Friday. I had.
What was their name?
A gentleman called in. He is a caregiver for his very long time girlfriend, who has had a significant stroke, and she is nonverbal now. She's been in the hospital for a while. I talk to him, if not every month, every other month. They're on they're an independent living waiver. That's a whole nother area and topic. But we do have some consumers who have such a significant disability and need so much care that goes over the cost cap of what the state will allow, that they qualify what's called an independent living waiver, or an ILW as we call it. And this specific individual also qualifies for incontinent supplies because this individual is incontinent. And so, long story short, is he calls me all the time to let me know what he needs. We're able to order those supplies through the Medicaid waiver program, which is amazing. Yeah, because we all know those supplies are very, very expensive.
Yeah. The whole person's mission is to connect people with disabilities to resources they need. And I think that story really exemplifies that, is that somebody whose position with TWP isn't necessarily, doesn't spell out how they get catheters, and then they come to you and they're connected to that resource which they need. So I think that's a wonderful example. Is there any other success stories in CDS you'd like to touch on?
I have several, but I won't bore you with all of them. Another one that just came to mind, I think it's been about 6 months or so ago. I had a consumer who called in, and because due to his disability,
What was her name?
You better stop. Because of his disability, he is paralyzed, and he has massive seizures. So taking a shower for him isn't like you or I. It's a process for him. So we were able, through our Consumer Assistant Fund program, because we are a not-for-profit, we were able to buy him the shower chair that he needs, that allows him to lay back. So one, he doesn't, and of course, if he has a seizure in the shower, because he has a roll-in shower, he doesn't fall out of his chair and harm himself. So we were able to, again, do that with our Consumer Assistance Fund request.
There are so many needs that when we meet somebody, you would have to think such complex thoughts about every facet of their private life. And it's great to hear that we're able to address some of those, outwardly invisible needs, like showering safely, which we all take for granted.
Right.
Absolutely. So earlier you mentioned with a waiver program. Can you touch base on that and what that means and how that works?
Sure. So on the Missouri side, we have what's called an independent living waiver. It gets very technical, but just kind of a short summary of it is our cost cap, what the state refers to as a cost cap. So the plan of cares can only be right now 480 units. I know this is getting kind of technical, but one unit is equivalent to 15 minutes. So 4 units is an hour. That kind of, so they're allowed to get 480 units a month. If you break that down, that's not very much time. So it's a few hours a day, maybe 7 days a week, depending on the person and their disability, if they're capped out. But there are individuals who, for example, the person who gets the SMS supplies or the incontinence supplies, who gets one of those waivers, it allows that person to get over that 480 units per month. It can go. We actually had a consumer who gets 11 hours a day through that waiver, which is great for them because it keeps them out of a nursing home. And in the long run, it saves the state thousands and thousands of dollars every year, hundreds of thousands of dollars probably by keeping them out of a nursing home. But um, do you want me to touch base on the Kansas side?
Yeah.
As well?
We got Kansas listeners.
Yeah.
Okay. So on the Kansas side, there are different waivers as well. They have like a TB waiver, traumatic brain injury, more or less traumatic injury.
Stay tuned for a future TBI episode.
They also have physical disability and then the frail and elderly waivers. And those all fall into the home and community-based services program. So those it just depends. And again, the state determines all of those. We don't at the whole person. So we kind of just base it. Those are just, I guess, more or less the waivers that we work with.
Okay, awesome. And then if somebody wanted to be a PCA, what does that look like and how do they get started?
It's kind of the same process as becoming a CDS consumer. They'll meet with our intake team or they'll get with their, let's say a consumer has a PCA and they leave for whatever reason, or they want two, they can have up to 4. So they can have like a main and then backups or they can switch. I mean, I'm getting a little off track, but we do have another consumer who's quadriplegic. He works full time. So he has one of his PCAs who come in the morning, gets him out of bed physically. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to get out of bed and go to work. Takes him to work, and then we have another consumer or a PCA. Excuse me. He has another PCA who comes and takes him home, feeds him dinner, puts him to bed, that kind of stuff. I totally forgot what the question was.
Oh, that's okay.
Becoming a PCA.
Oh, yeah,
becoming
sorry.
a PCA.
So anyway, they can have up to 4, but they'll have to fill out an application just like a job. And then they do have to pass what's called an FCSR, Family Care Safety Registry background check through the state. There are certain requirements that they have to meet for that. So if they have certain findings, as they call them, they would not be eligible, but they could still, depending on the finding, they could still put in a request for a good cause waiver that would maybe allow them to still work for that consumer. Those processes can take a week, 2 weeks. It kind of just depends on how long it takes to get that background check back from the state. And then once they are good to go as far as that goes, then the case manager will meet with them and show them the process of what they need to do as far as clocking in and out and kind of go over the do's and don'ts again with them.
And then what is it like what about the hours? Is it considered like a full-time job, part-time job? Can they choose how many hours they want to work?
That's actually a really good question. Each consumer is considered an employer. We are strictly just a third party in this. So each consumer is the actual employer of that caregiver. Typically, they don't have plan of cares that go up to 40 hours a week or more than 40 hours a week. So to kind of answer your question, they're never really going to go over overtime or get overtime or anything like that, or make it a full-time job. It's usually, to be honest with you, it's caring for a loved one. You're already going to be doing it. You're already caring for your mother, your father, your child who has a significant disability. Why not get paid to do it through the program?
And just to reiterate on that aspect of it, so the whole person does not employ any PCAs. You become a PCA through the whole person. Your employer will be the person to whom you're providing the care.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So the TWP empowers people who need a PCA to employ a PCA or for PCAs.
Yes.
Brandy, what are your hopes for the state of CDS in the next decade? So 10 years from now, you're about to turn 30. What are you hoping it looks like in the world of CDS?
Oh, you're my favorite person right now. So this all kind of comes down to the Capitol, and us advocating at the Capitol. Years ago, when I worked at the other independent living center, I remember plan of cares being up in, I think, I could be wrong, but 580 some units a month. we're down to 480. Actually, last year at this time we were at 465, and on July 1st of 23, they bumped us up a whole 15 units, which we're very thankful for. But it's just not enough time.
Who's
for
the
these.
governing body of that?
I don't know.
Oh, so is which department of the state is pumping those numbers up and down?
Well, it's just I guess the governor, everybody as a whole, just the legislators, everyone there. Ideally, it would be great if we could have, and I'm not saying, this to be a full-time job for someone, but I would love for someone with a disability to feel like they can, and their caregiver, because I'll be honest, most of our caregivers are family members, or very, very close friends, but it's a child looking out for an elderly parent or whatever the case may be. And we know that it's not going to be a full-time job, but some of them do have to quit their jobs to take care of them because, let's say the state, I'm just throwing out numbers, the state authorizes them, and it equates to 3 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, it's consumer directed, so they can do their hours however they wish, but that's to break it out so they have time through the whole month. But we know that caregiver is probably taking care of them 10, 12 hours a day,
What's something a listener can do to advocate for that kind of change at the Capitol?
Well, I know that for a while we were sending out stuff. I don't know if we are still doing that. I know where I worked at before, they would send out mass emails to them, encouraging them to call their legislators and talk to them about why they need it, especially the consumers, why they need this service. Also, keep in mind, kind of going back to the waiver thing, once a consumer turns 65, they no longer qualify for an independent living waiver. So let's say they have had a waiver for years and years and years, and they're getting 480 units through the regular care plan, and then they're getting an additional 700 units on the waiver. When they turn 65, those 700 units are gone. Does that mean their disability is gone? No. So it's very frustrating trying to get, and I'm not talking bad about anyone at the Capitol, but it's very frustrating trying to get them to understand that just because they turn 65 doesn't mean that their disability goes away.
And they don't need further assistance.
Right. If anything, they probably need more.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Systemic advocacy is a core service here at the Whole Person.
Yes.
Right.
So folks, you heard it here first, or perhaps you've heard it before, but Brandy is encouraging you, and Kirby and I as well, to get in contact with your representatives and let them know what consumer directed services means for so many Kansans and Missourians.
And actually, I think we have a day at the Capitol coming up. Is it in April?
Yeah, we do. I can't remember the date either.
Well, you guys will have to just announce it on your next one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look that up and announce it, because that will be a big one. I don't know if we plan on, I know in the past we had brought people to the Capitol to help advocate. I don't know if that's something we're doing or not. I don't want to throw that out there if we're not doing that. But just to encourage them to call them if they can't make it in person, to call them and advocate for themselves.
All right, Brandy, do you have any big costumes coming up? Hate to change the subject, but listener, Brandy, it doesn't take anything to get her into a special outfit at work. Recently, for Red Friday, Brandy's wearing red pants at present, but I was going to brag about her other red pants, but maybe it's not that special occurrence. Around Halloween, Brandy was in a full Bette Midler Hocus Pocus head to toe. I mean, fully. I did not recognize her. I thought that the witch was in.
Yeah, that's my favorite holiday. If you can't tell.
Oh, and Christmas time, around the holidays, Brandy coordinated, for instance, Secret Santa.
I had a part in it. Yeah, it's fun.
It is fun. You did a great job. I think now we'll throw to ad. Get out your wallet. Buy whatever we tell you to. See you soon.
At TWP Catering, we are more than just mouth-watering sandwiches and salads. We're on a mission to make a difference.
How do we do this? By empowering individuals with disabilities to learn essential cooking skills through our Employabilities program.
Every bite you take supports a brighter future for someone striving to be more competitive in the job market.
TWP Catering, where every sandwich, salad, and dessert serves a purpose. Order with us and make a positive impact today. It's catering with the social conscious.
And we're back. If you're local here in the KC area, we have a few events that we would just want to discuss. I think we've been over them before, but just to reiterate, we do rock climbing at ROKC the second Saturday of every month. We do bowling, and that's for anybody with a disability can join us at KC Bowl, and that's the third Wednesday of every month at noon. And you can always go to our website to check out these events further, and that's thewholeperson.org/calendar.
And mark your calendar even farther out for the KC Ultimate Games, hosted by the award-winning Kate Huang, who is our adaptive sports director here. Anything you could ever want in the world of adaptive sports is headed your way. The KC Ultimate Games, that'll be June 13th through June 16th. So coax your personal trainer out of retirement and get whatever you need ready for that.
All right, Brandy, thanks so much for being with us today. Was there anything else that you wanted to say to wrap up the interview?
The only thing I would like to add is if you're currently with CDS or if you want to become a CDS consumer, please give us a call. You can ask to speak with me or our intake team. We'd be happy to help you. If you're currently on CDS services with another provider, always feel free to give us a call and we can actually initiate that transfer over to us.
Wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much, Brandy. And thank you so much, listener, for joining us for our second episode. We hope to see you at the third. Have a good one. Bye.
See ya.